Hello, it's Bob Leahy from PositiveLight.com, and today we're in Guelph, Ontario, and we're in the AIDS Committee of Guelph and Wellington County offices, and I'm talking to Megan DePutter. Hi, Megan.
Hi.
Megan has been doing some interesting research, and she's been investigating people living with HIV and how they deal with issues of intimacy. Tell me, Megan, why did you start on this kind of research? What prompted it?
Well, actually, for the last 10 years, staff at ACG have noticed that clients have been having barriers to sexual intimacy.
How did you find that out?
It's come out in support sessions with the support workers, and it's come out in positive prevention sessions as well. So during workshops when we've talked about issues such as HIV disclosure and HIV transmission, people are experiencing things like loneliness and frustration, trying to meet partners, and simply just not having sex.
So you decided to do some community-based research to find out more about that. Tell me, how did you get that off the ground?
Right, so we applied for an OHTN capacity building
The
fund.
OHTN is what?
Sorry. we applied for a grant through the Ontario HIV Treatment Network, the OHTN, for a capacity building fund for community-based research.
And so then you were approved?
Yes, we got the grant and then began our project. So we interviewed 18 participants here from the local community, participants of our agency, and we conducted face-to-face semi-structured interviews with a peer research assistant and another research assistant.
Now, that's interesting. You used a peer research assistant. It sounds like you got the community involved right from the start in the project. Is that right? How did you do that?
Right. So with any community-based research project, having that investment and involvement from the community, which you are researching, that kind of community involvement is really important from inception to completion. So we had an advisory committee as well as a working group.
And many people living with HIV were involved in that. And you also had a peer research assistant is somebody living with HIV who actually helps you with the research and asking questions?
Yes, well, our peer research assistant was involved from the very beginning in terms of conceptualizing the project, trying to identify sort of key areas of interest, as well as the methodology. And he played a key role in, I think, actually getting participants to come out. Yeah.
Now, tell me what kind of questions you asked people.
Sure. So they were pretty personal. We were trying to understand the barriers to sexual intimacy. So we wanted to talk about what kind of challenges people were experiencing, whether it was around disclosure or transmission. And this included people who were in existing relationships too. So we also wanted to know about what challenges they faced in their relationships.
So has anybody ever done this before, do you think, or no?
Well, we've learned that there is a little bit of research out there about what kind of challenges people living with HIV face when it comes to sexual intimacy and relationships. The most data that is present on this topic is from the US, and it's a little bit scattered.
Okay, let's get to the good stuff, Megan. Tell me, what were your findings?
Well, first of all, we found out that, as we had predicted, people were celibate. They identified themselves as being celibate or as experiencing a loss of sex.
Now, why would they choose celibacy?
Well, it's a choice in context. One of the main findings that we identified was that people are afraid of transmitting the virus, and so fear of transmission was an enormous barrier. In some cases, that was fueled by an exaggerated sense of risk, but even in cases where there was a low risk of transmission, people were afraid of transmitting the virus, and even if they had a willing partner, refrained from having sex.
That seems kind of sad. How did you feel about that particular finding?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for one thing, it's clear that people are carrying around an enormous sense of responsibility and playing a major role in the decision makings in relationships and in partnerships around responsibility and risk. So it's a huge burden to carry. Okay.
So that was very major. Tell me some more that you found.
Well, not surprising, fear of rejection was another barrier. And that includes, sometimes that fear of rejection was very well founded because, of course, people have experienced rejection in the past. Another barrier was negative self-perception. That's especially to do with body image, negative body image, relating to HIV itself, HIV meds, and aging as well.
Now, does this research give you clues as to the kind of programming you could do in the future? Because it seems to be, maybe there are some gaps you're identifying here.
Absolutely. Well, one of the issues was isolation, and social isolation for a number of reasons, including the fact that sometimes people would hold back or even end budding relationships for fear of having to deal with that person's negative reaction, or having to deal with that person's fear, or some of the emotions that come up upon HIV disclosure. So there was social isolation, and that was also exaggerated by things like poverty, for example. But we saw that there was a need for more informal social networks and community building among PHAs to address social isolation, but also internalized stigma as well, which permeated the data. So that was one area.
Now, tell me, Megan, this sounds like a really good project. You've got some good findings. What are your feelings about community-based research, having gone through that process? Can you talk a little bit about how you've felt about it?
I think it's been a phenomenal process, and as a capacity-building project, we as a staff have learned so much and built so much capacity. In terms of community-based research, it's been fantastic, because this is work that is directly related to and involving our own clients. So people have been participating through every step of the way. And by participants, I really mean, our clients here, but as well our broader community. And I think it's been a great way to involve people into research, maybe people who have been disenfranchised or marginalized.
Megan, who participated in this research? Can you tell us?
Sure. So we had 18 clients of ACG. So those are all people living with HIV and AIDS. There were 13 men and 5 women. And the average age was 49. And just over half of that number identified as gay or bisexual.
Interesting. Now, I want to ask you, how important is sex for people living with HIV?
Well, the participants in our study identified sex as an important value. Very often, though, they also identified a desire for other kinds of physical closeness as well. So whether that was cuddling on a couch or walking hand in hand. But regardless, the participants all missed sex as well as other forms of intimacy.
So intimacy can have many forms.
Absolutely.
Not just sex.
Absolutely. And it might have had something to do with our average age of participants at 49, but definitely people identified other forms of intimacy as something that they were missing as well. But I think that as we look at the work that we do, we need to recognize that sex is important for the quality of life. And of course, in the Denver Principles, it's written that people with AIDS have a right to a satisfying sex life as anyone else. And I think that we need to acknowledge that that is an important value. And
so that was the basis for your research.
Yes, I think that being sex positive was an important value in this work, that we recognize that sex is an important part of quality of life, and we need to find ways to support people in experiencing that important element. But the first step is understanding the barriers that they're experiencing.
Yeah. Megan, I want to ask you, Guelph is a fairly small city. About how far are we away from Toronto?
Well, we're about an hour outside
from
of Toronto.
So you're not rural, but you're a small town. How do you think the results you had here, how would they translate to, say, a large urban centre setting? Would they be different?
Well, in Guelph, we have a medium-sized city of about 120,000 people. And we also serve a rural county. But I think that, a lot of the findings that we have seen, such as fear of transmission, fear of rejection, negative self-perception, and social isolation, can apply to a lot of people in a lot of different areas. While our research was community-driven, I do imagine that other people or in other communities would be experiencing similar things. in Guelph, one of the challenges for people who identify as LGBTQ is that there's not a strong gay community here. In fact, we don't even have a gay bar. So for other communities who also lack that kind of cohesiveness in terms of a gay community that you might find in Toronto, that may also help to perpetuate social isolation.
So the environment, in a sense, is a barrier to meeting people and having intimacy and having sex.
Yes, our participants identified that, along with other issues that play into that, such as not having a vehicle or living in poverty.
Or not having your own place. Yeah. Megan, thank you so much for talking to us. This is Bob Leahy from Positive Light, reporting from Guelph, Ontario. Thank you for watching.